Chapter 1, Exposition. The slow afternoon. It was one of those Asheville afternoons in late September 2018, where the air carried the first crisp edge of fall, but the sun still poured warm across the Blue Ridge foothills. I was slouched on the faded green couch in my apartment, a second-floor walk-up off Haywood Street, scrolling through my phone, half reading texts, half watching the dust motes dance in a slant of light. My roommate was out, probably hiking with his girlfriend, and the quiet felt heavier than usual. My phone buzzed with a missed call from Caleb, my best friend since we were 15, when we'd bonded over sneaking beers behind the bleachers at Asheville High. His voicemail was short. "Hey, Ethan, left my jacket in your car after the brewery last night. Can you drop it off? I'm at my mom's place." It wasn't a big ask. I grabbed my keys, fished Caleb's denim jacket from the back seat of my beat-up Honda, and texted him I was on my way. His mom's house was a 15-minute drive, tucked into a quiet West Asheville neighborhood where bungalows sat close together, their porches cluttered with potted plants and wind chimes. I'd been there countless times, sleepovers in high school, late-night study sessions for our community college classes, but I didn't know his mom, Nora, all that well. She was always polite, offering snacks or a quick smile, but she kept her distance, a reserved woman with a soft voice and eyes that seemed to carry more than she let on. I pulled up to the house, jacket in hand, expecting Caleb to answer the door. When it opened, Nora stood there instead. She was in a loose white tank top and yoga pants, her dark hair pulled into a messy bun, a faint sheen of sweat on her collarbone. She'd clearly just finished some kind of workout, maybe yoga or a run, her breath still a little uneven. Her eyes flicked up to meet mine, and for a second, she looked surprised, then softened into a small smile. "Ethan," she said, her voice warm, like she was testing the sound of my name. "Caleb's out grabbing some groceries. Come in, it's cooler inside." I hesitated, the jacket suddenly heavy in my hand. "I was just dropping this off," I said, holding it up like evidence. She stepped back, gesturing me inside, and I followed, catching the faint scent of lavender and something earthier, like cedar. The living room was familiar, wood floors, a sagging couch, a bookshelf stuffed with novels and old photo albums, but today it felt different, like I'd walked into a space that wasn't entirely mine to occupy. "Want some water?" Nora asked, already moving toward the kitchen. I nodded, sitting on the edge of the couch, trying not to notice the way her tank top clung to her back. She returned with 2 glasses, handing me one before settling into the armchair across from me. We talked about small things at first, Caleb's new job at a downtown coffee shop, the way Asheville's tourist crowds had gotten worse. But then she leaned forward, her elbows on her knees, and said, "You've been good to Caleb, Ethan. He doesn't always say it, but he needs you." Her voice was quiet, but there was weight behind it, like she was confessing something she hadn't meant to. I didn't know how to respond, so I just nodded, feeling the air between us shift, soft but undeniable. Chapter 2, Inciting Incident, the invitation. A few days later, I was back at Caleb's place, sprawled on the basement floor with him, playing some old racing game on his PlayStation. The screen flickered, and Caleb cursed as his car spun out. I laughed, but my mind wasn't fully there. I kept thinking about Nora, the way her eyes had lingered on me that afternoon, the way her voice had softened when she said my name. It wasn't anything concrete, just a feeling, like a song you couldn't quite name but couldn't stop humming. That I headed upstairs to grab a drink, and there she was, standing at the kitchen counter in a navy sweater and jeans, her hair loose and slightly damp, like she'd just showered. She looked up, and for a moment, we just stood there, the fridge humming between us. "Hey," she said, her voice low, like she was afraid of breaking something. "Didn't know you were over." "Yeah, just hanging with Caleb," I said, reaching for a soda. My fingers brushed the cold can, but I didn't open it. She smiled, setting down a mug of tea. "You boys and your games," she said, but there was no judgment in it, just a kind of warmth that made my chest tighten. She leaned against the counter, her fingers tracing the edge of the mug. "I'm making dinner tonight," she said, almost too casually. "Nothing fancy, just pasta." You're welcome to stay if you want. I blinked, caught off guard. Caleb hadn't mentioned dinner, and I wasn't sure if this was just politeness or something else. I don't want to impose, I said, but she shook her head. You're not. It'd be nice to have you. I nodded, my throat suddenly dry. Okay, sure. She smiled again, and I went back downstairs, the soda forgotten in my hand. Caleb didn't seem to notice anything when I told him I was staying for dinner. Cool, he said, already focused on the next race. But as we climbed the stairs later, the smell of garlic and tomatoes filling the house, I felt like I was walking towards something bigger than a meal. Chapter 3, Rising Action. The dinner was simple, pasta with marinara, a salad, some bread Nora had baked herself. Caleb and I sat at the small dining table, while Nora moved between the kitchen and the table, her movements easy, unhurried. The radio played low, some folk song I didn't recognize, and the windows let in the soft purple light of dusk. Caleb talked about his job, about some tourist who'd tipped him $20 for a latte, but I was only half listening. My eyes kept drifting to Nora, the way her hands brushed her hair behind her ear, the way she laughed at Caleb's stories, soft and genuine. After a while, Caleb excused himself to take a call, leaving me and Nora alone at the table. The silence wasn't uncomfortable, but it was heavy, like the air before a storm. She picked up her glass of wine, swirling it gently. You're quiet tonight, she said, her eyes meeting mine. Just thinking, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. About what? Her tone was curious, not pressing, but it felt like she was asking for more than I knew how to give. I shrugged, my fingers tracing the edge of my plate. Life, I guess. How it moves faster than you expect. She nodded, her expression softening. It does that. One day you're young, and the next you're wondering where the time went. She paused, then added, sometimes I feel like I'm still figuring out who I am, even at my age. I looked at her, really looked, and for a moment, she wasn't Caleb's mom, not the woman who'd once driven us to soccer practice. She was Nora, someone with her own doubts, her own quiet battles. You seem like you've got it together, I said, and I meant it. She laughed, a small, breathy sound. I fake it well. Caleb came back before I could say more, and the moment slipped away, but it lingered in me, like a stone dropped into still water. Chapter 4, Rising Action. The grocery store. A week later, I ran into Nora at the co-op on Merrimon Avenue. I was grabbing coffee and a bagel, my headphones half on, when I turned the corner and nearly bumped into her cart. She was in a gray hoodie and jeans, her hair loose, a little messy, like she'd just rolled out of bed. Ethan, she said, her voice startled but warm. Didn't expect to see you here. Same, I said, pulling my headphones down. Just needed some breakfast. She glanced at my cart, coffee, a bagel, a random box of cereal, and smiled. Big plans for the day? I laughed, rubbing the back of my neck. Not really. Just surviving. She nodded, like she understood more than I'd said. We stood there for a moment, our carts between us, the hum of the store around us. I'm grabbing stuff for dinner, she said. If you're free, you should come by. Caleb's out with friends tonight. The invitation caught me off guard, and I hesitated, not because I didn't want to, but because I wasn't sure what it meant. You sure? I asked. She smiled, her eyes steady. I wouldn't ask if I wasn't. That evening, I stood on her porch, my heart beating faster than it should have. She opened the door in a black sweater and jeans, barefoot, a glass of wine in her hand. The house smelled like roasted vegetables and thyme, and a Norah Jones album played softly in the background. We ate at the kitchen counter, talking about small things, movies, the changing leaves, the way Asheville felt different in the fall. But every so often, our eyes would meet, and the air would shift, like we were both holding our breath. Chapter 5, Rising Action. The quiet night after dinner, we moved to the living room, Nora curling up on one end of the couch, me on the other. A movie played on the TV, some indie drama neither of us was really watching. She sipped her wine, her legs tucked beneath her, and I tried to focus on the screen, but my mind was on her, the way her sweater slipped off one shoulder, the way her laugh came soft and unforced. "You always sit so far away," she said at one point, her voice teasing but gentle that I felt my face heat up. "Just giving you space," I said. She looked at me, her eyes searching. "You don't have to." I moved closer, not close enough to touch, but close enough to feel the warmth of her presence. The movie droned on, but neither of us was paying attention. At some point, she turned her head, her eyes meeting mine, and for a moment, it was just us, no Caleb, no expectations, just two people in a quiet room, seeing each other. Her breath hitched, just barely, and I felt mine do the same. We didn't move, didn't speak, but that look said more than words ever could. Chapter 6, Climax, the bar. A few weeks later, Caleb and I were at a bar downtown, a cramped place on Patton Avenue with too many TVs and too much noise. We were nursing beers, talking about nothing, work, football, some girl Caleb was texting. But my mind was elsewhere, replaying that night on Nora's couch, the way her eyes had held mine, the way the air had felt alive with possibility. Then I saw her. Nora was at the bar with a friend, her hair loose, a dark blue top catching the dim light. She was laughing, her head tilted back, and for a second, I couldn't look away. Then her eyes found mine, and she smiled, a small, private thing that made my pulse race. She walked over to our table, her friend trailing behind. "Hey, boys," she said, her voice light but warm. "Didn't expect to see you here." Caleb grinned. "Hey, Mom. You out causing trouble?" She laughed, brushing her hair behind her ear. "Hardly." Her eyes flicked to me, just for a second, but it was enough. "You two behaving?" "Trying," I said, and she smiled again, her hand brushing my arm as she passed by. It was quick, barely there, but it sent a jolt through me. Caleb didn't seem to notice, but later, when he stepped away to take a call, Nora came back to the bar. I found myself walking over, my heart pounding. "Hey," I said, leaning against the counter. "Hey," she replied, her voice soft beneath the noise. "Didn't expect you to come over." "Didn't expect to see you here," I said, and she laughed, that same breathy sound that pulled me in. "I needed a night out," she said. "Been feeling stuck." "You don't look stuck," I said, and something flickered in her eyes, not surprise, just acknowledgement. "You look good too," she said, and the words hung between us, heavy and real. Chapter 7, Falling Action. The second dinner the next Saturday, my phone buzzed with a text from Nora. "Made too much food again. Come by if you're free." I stared at the screen, my thumb hovering over the reply. Caleb was out of town for the weekend, and the invitation felt different this time, more deliberate. I texted back, "Be there in 20. When I arrived, the house was warm, lit by soft lamps and the glow of candles on the kitchen counter. Nora was in a gray cardigan and jeans, her hair down, a glass of wine in her hand. She smiled as she let me in, and we ate together, the conversation easy but laced with something unspoken. After dinner, we sat on the couch again, closer this time, the space between us shrinking with every word. "I like having you here," she said at one point, her voice quiet but steady. "I like being here," I said, and I meant it. The air felt charged, like we were standing on the edge of something neither of us could name. Chapter 8, Falling Action. The confession. We didn't talk about it, not directly, but the system, the nights that followed. We saw each other in passing, at Caleb's place or around town, and every time, our eyes would meet just a moment longer than necessary, a silent acknowledgement of something unspoken. One evening, I stopped by to drop off a book Caleb had lent me. Nora answered the door, her hair damp from a shower, a soft sweater slipping off one shoulder. "Caleb's not here," she said, but her voice was an invitation. "I know," I said. "I just wanted to see you." Her eyes softened, and she stepped back. "Come in." We sat on the couch, not touching, not speaking much, just existing in that quiet space we'd built together. "I think about you," she said suddenly, her voice barely above a whisper. "More than I should." My heart stopped. "I think about you too." She looked at me, her eyes searching, vulnerable. It's complicated, Ethan. I know, I said, my voice rough. But it's real. She nodded, her lips parting like she wanted to say more, but she didn't. We sat there, the weight of our words filling the room, and when I left, her hand brushed mine, soft and deliberate. Chapter 9, Resolution. The quiet understanding. Months passed, and we never crossed the line, never spoke of it again, but the connection remained, a thread stretched taut between us. At Caleb's birthday dinner in December, our eyes met across the crowded table, and I saw it, the same quiet longing, the same unspoken truth. We didn't need to say it. It was enough to know it was there. Caleb noticed nothing, or if he did, he never said. He was too caught up in his own life, his own plans, and I was grateful for it. Nora and I continued our careful dance, our moments brief but heavy with meaning, a glance in the grocery store, a smile at a coffee shop, a brush of hands when no one was looking. Chapter 10, Denouement. The drive. One spring evening in 2019, I drove past Nora's house, the windows glowing softly in the dusk. I didn't stop, didn't knock, but I thought about her, about the way her eyes had held mine, about the silence that said more than words ever could. I didn't need to see her to know she was there, living her life, carrying the same quiet ache I did. Some things don't need to be spoken to be real. Some stories don't need endings to be complete. Nora wasn't just Caleb's mom anymore, she was the woman who taught me that a glance could hold a universe, that silence could be louder than words, and that some moments, fleeting as they are, change you forever. Conclusion. The weight of unspoken things. The spring of 2019 in Asheville unfolded slowly, like a flower opening under a hesitant sun. The dogwoods along the Blue Ridge Parkway bloomed in soft pinks and whites, their petals scattering across the pavement like confetti from a celebration no one attended. I drove those winding roads sometimes, my Honda's engine humming low, the windows cracked to let in the smell of damp earth and pine. It was the kind of beauty that made you ache, not because it was fleeting, but because it reminded you of everything you couldn't hold on to. Nora was like that, too, a presence that lingered, soft but heavy, in the corners of my mind that I hadn't seen her in weeks, not since Caleb's birthday dinner in December, when our eyes had met across the table, a silent conversation in a room full of noise. The holidays had come and gone, a blur of family gatherings, crowded bars, and late-night drives through the city's twinkling streets. Caleb and I had fallen back into our rhythm, basketball at the park, beers at Wedge Brewing, arguments about music that didn't mean anything but felt like they did. He was the same as ever, loud and easygoing, oblivious to the weight I carried. I was grateful for that, but it also made me feel like I was hiding something, like I'd stolen a piece of his life and tucked it away where he couldn't see that I didn't mean to keep thinking about Nora. I told myself it was nothing, just a fleeting moment stretched too long in my head. But it wasn't nothing. It was the way she'd looked at me that night on her couch, her eyes steady and unguarded, like she was seeing me for the first time. It was the way her voice had softened when she said, "I think about you," and the way my own voice had cracked when I admitted I thought about her too. It was the brush of her hand against mine, so brief it might have been an accident, but so deliberate it couldn't have been. Those moments had carved themselves into me, sharp and quiet, and no amount of distraction could dull their edges. One evening in early April, I found myself driving past her house again. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of lavender and gold, and the neighborhood was quiet, save for the distant hum of a lawnmower. Her car was in the driveway, a silver SUV that looked out of place against the weathered charm of the bungalow. I slowed but didn't stop, my hands tight on the steering wheel. I didn't know what I was looking for, maybe just a glimpse of her, maybe just the reassurance that she was still there, living her life, carrying the same quiet ache I did. That I parked across the street, the engine idling, and sat there for a long minute, debating. The porch light was on, casting a warm glow across the front steps, and I could see the faint outline of her through the living room window, moving with that easy grace I'd come to recognize. She was alone, or at least I thought she was. Caleb had mentioned something about a work trip, a conference in Raleigh, so it was just her, maybe reading or tidying up, filling the space of her evening with small, ordinary things. I wanted to knock, to say something, anything, but the weight of it all, the years of friendship with Caleb, the unspoken rules we'd both been careful not to break, kept me in my seat. Instead, I drove away, the city blurring past me, the lights of downtown Asheville flickering like stars against the darkening hills. I ended up at a coffee shop on Biltmore Avenue, one of those places with mismatched furniture and too many plants, where the air smelled of roasted beans and old books. I ordered a black coffee, too late in the day for it, and sat by the window, watching strangers pass by. The barista, a girl with a nose ring and a faded tattoo on her wrist, hummed along to a folk song playing softly through the speakers. I sipped the coffee, bitter and too hot, and let my mind wander back to Nora that I thought about the first time I'd really noticed her, that afternoon when she'd opened the door in her workout clothes, her skin flushed, her smile soft but surprised. I thought about the dinners we'd shared, the way the kitchen had smelled of garlic and herbs, the way her laugh had felt like a gift. I thought about the bar, the way her hand had brushed my arm, the way her eyes had held mine for a beat too long. And I thought about the silence, the way it had carried more than words ever could, a language only we understood that I didn't know what to call it, this thing between us. It wasn't love, not in the way people talk about in movies or songs. It wasn't lust either, though I'd be lying if I said I hadn't noticed the way her sweater clung to her shoulders or the way her hair fell across her face when she laughed. It was something else, something deeper, a recognition, maybe, of two people who saw each other in a way no one else did. She was Caleb's mom, yes, but she was also Nora, a woman who'd spent years holding her world together, who'd forgotten what it felt like to be seen until, somehow, I'd seen her. The coffee shop closed at 9, and I drove home, the streets quiet now, the air cool enough to make me roll up my windows. My apartment was dark when I got there, the kind of dark that feels heavier than it should. I lay on my couch, staring at the ceiling, the fan spinning lazily above me. I didn't sleep much that night, my thoughts tangled in memories of Nora, her voice, her eyes, the way she'd said, "Some things are better left in quiet." I wondered if she was right, if some things were too big, too fragile, to be spoken aloud. But I also wondered if keeping them quiet meant losing them, letting them slip away like petals on the wind. The next morning, I woke to a text from Caleb, "Yo, you free today? Wanna hit the trails?" I stared at the screen, my thumb hovering over the reply. I wanted to say yes, to fall back into the easy rhythm of our friendship, but something held me back. I texted back, "Maybe later, got some stuff to do," and set my phone down, feeling a pang of guilt. I didn't have stuff to do, not really, but I needed space, time to figure out what this thing with Nora was, if it was anything at all. That I spent the day wandering Asheville, the city unfolding around me like a familiar song. I walked along the French Broad River, the water glinting in the morning light, and stopped at a food truck for a taco, eating it on a bench while tourists snapped photos nearby. I ended up at Pritchard Park, where a busker played a slow, mournful tune on a guitar, his case open for tips. I tossed in $1 and sat on the grass, letting the music wash over me. It was one of those moments where the world felt both impossibly big and impossibly small, like I was part of something larger but still alone in it. That afternoon, I found myself back in West Asheville, not far from Nora's house. I hadn't planned it, not consciously, but my feet carried me there, down the quiet streets lined with craftsman homes and blooming azaleas. I stood across from her house again, the same spot I'd parked the night before, and watched as the front door opened. Nora stepped out, a canvas tote bag slung over her shoulder, her hair tied back in a loose ponytail. She didn't see me, and I didn't call out. I just watched her walk to her car, her movement steady but tired, like she was carrying something heavier than the bag. That I could have gone to her then, could have said something, anything, but I didn't. Instead, I turned and walked away, the ache in my chest growing sharper with every step. I didn't know what I wanted, for her to say something, for me to say something, for us to cross the line we'd both been circling for months. But I knew it wasn't that simple. She was Nora, Caleb's mom, a woman whose life was tied to responsibilities I could only imagine. And I was Ethan, her son's friend, a 22-year-old who didn't even know what he wanted from his own life, let alone hers. The weeks that followed were a blur of routine, classes at UNC Asheville, shifts at the bookstore where I worked, late-night talks with Caleb that felt both familiar and distant. I saw Nora a few times, always in passing, always with other people around. At a barbecue Caleb hosted in May, she was there, moving through the backyard with a tray of drinks, her smile polite but guarded. Our eyes met once, briefly, and I saw it, the same quiet recognition, the same unspoken question. But we didn't speak, didn't linger, and when I left that night, I felt the weight of her absence more than I'd expected. Summer came, hot and heavy, the air thick with humidity and the buzz of cicadas. Caleb got a new job, something in marketing, and started talking about moving to Charlotte. "It's time for a change," he said one night over beers at a rooftop bar, the city spread out below us like a map of possibilities. I nodded, but my mind was elsewhere, on Nora, on the way her laugh had sounded that first night we'd eaten together, on the way her hand had brushed mine. I wondered if she thought about me, if she carried the same ache, or if she'd let it go, tucked it away like a letter she'd never send. One evening in July, I ran into her at the River Arts District, where artists sold pottery and paintings under colorful tents. She was alone, browsing a stall with handmade jewelry, her fingers tracing the edge of a silver necklace. I almost didn't approach her, but something pulled me forward, like a tide I couldn't resist. "Hey," I said, my voice softer than I'd meant. She looked up, her eyes widening for a split second before softening. "Ethan," she said, like my name was a secret she'd been holding on to. "What are you doing here?" "Just wandering," I said, shoving my hands in my pockets. "You?" "Same," she said, smiling. "Needed to get out of the house." We walked together for a while, not saying much, just letting the crowd and the music carry us. The air smelled of clay and river water, and the sun was low, casting long shadows across the pavement. At one point, our shoulders brushed, and neither of us pulled away. It was small, but it was enough to make my heart race, to make the world feel like it had narrowed to just the two of us. "I've missed this," she said after a while, her voice so quiet I almost missed it. "Missed what?" I asked, though I knew. She didn't answer right away, just looked at me, her eyes steady and unguarded. "You know," she said finally, and I did that. We didn't stay long after that. She bought the necklace, a simple silver chain with a small pendant, and I walked her to her car. The parking lot was nearly empty, the sky a deep indigo now, and when she turned to say goodbye, her hand rested on my arm, just for a moment. "Take care, Ethan," she said, her voice soft but heavy. "You too," I said, and I meant it more than I could say. That I watched her drive away, the taillights of her SUV fading into the dusk, and I stood there for a long time, the air cooling around me, the ache in my chest both sharper and softer than before. I didn't know if I'd see her again, not like this, not in a way that mattered. But I knew I'd carry her with me, in the quiet spaces of my days, in the moments when the world felt too big and too small. All at once, fall came again, and with it, the rhythm of life shifted. Caleb moved to Charlotte in August, leaving the bungalow quieter than it had ever been. I saw Nora one last time before the year ended, at a coffee shop on Haywood Street, where she was sitting alone with a book and a mug of tea. I didn't approach her, didn't want to disturb the stillness of her moment, but our eyes met through the window, and she smiled, a small, sad smile that said everything we'd never said. That I left Asheville the following spring, took a job in Raleigh, a city that felt too big, too fast, after the slow charm of the mountains. I didn't see Nora again, didn't call or text, didn't try to bridge the gap we'd both left open. But I thought about her, in the quiet of my new apartment, in the hum of a city that wasn't home. I thought about the way her eyes had held mine, the way her voice had carried a truth I hadn't known I needed. I thought about the silence, the way it had been both a barrier and a bridge, keeping us apart but holding us together. Some things don't need to be spoken to be real. Some stories don't need endings to be complete. Nora was more than Caleb's mom, more than a fleeting moment in a small mountain town. She was the woman who showed me that a glance could hold a lifetime, that silence could be louder than words, and that some connections, fragile as they are, never really fade. I drive past Asheville sometimes, on my way to somewhere else, and I see the hills, the dogwoods, the quiet streets where we walked, and I feel her there, not as a memory, but as a presence, soft and persistent, like the first breath of fall.